Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I am Patrick Murphy, and we finally have some real football to talk about. The Buckeyes played their first game of the season against Akron last Saturday. They beat the Zips 52-6 in what was a slow start, but a fairly convincing performance in the end. It's a Friday as we're recording this happy hour, so I was looking through the fridge, looking for something different. I also have to help a friend move after this, so I went with a Kitty Paw hard seltzer. It's a peach, which I like. I'm not sure if I've ever had this one, so we'll see how this goes, but you're not going to care much about what I'm doing, what I'm saying. We're going to talk Jeremiah Smith today, and we're going to talk it with somebody who knows a thing or two about being a star receiver for the Buckeyes, bringing in former number 8 himself, DeVier Posey. DeVier, my man, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Pat. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. All right, let's get into it. Before we talk about what JJ did in his first game, I want to talk to you about when you first got on campus. You were a highly recruited guy. You were with a group of highly recruited guys, including a guy in Terrell who was maybe the highest recruit at that point in time. As you guys are going through the offseason, as you're preparing for that first game, similar to what Jeremiah was doing, how can you explain to people what that time was like in your life as you're getting ready to take the field for the Buckeyes for the first time?
Just being 18 years old, first time away from your mom, you're trying to develop a routine. And I think being around a team that had amazing veterans, amazing seniors and juniors like Hartline, James Laurinaitis, Malcolm Jenkins, Brian Robisky, those guys, Doug Worthington, they had a model. I mean, they were coming off of playing in 2 back-to-back national championships. The team had a lot to prove. We had a lot of big early games, like I think it was like Mark Sanchez, Clay Matthews, Brian Cushing, that USC team, a good, solid Purdue team, a really good Michigan State team early in the schedule. So you're just trying to get on board, right? You're trying to do the conditioning. You're trying to make yourself stand out. And for me, all I cared about was being on the travel squad. Like I did not want to be in my dorm. I wanted to be on the sideline, and I wanted to be able to be in a uniform, and it's a super exciting time. I mean, I didn't have as much pressure as Jeremiah Smith had, so sure. I don't really know what that's like, but I can imagine.
Yeah, so I looked up your stats for the first game. Do you remember what you did your first game as a Buckeye?
I think I had like one or two catches, but I was able to score in my first game, which was, one of my favorite plays of my career, one of my favorite moments of my life. It was just, super scared being out there in front of 100,000 people. Todd Beckman was in the huddle, so I just didn't want to mess up the play. And it was an amazing experience.
You had 4 catches for 47 yards and that touchdown you talked about. So not quite Jeremiah's first game, but better than a lot of guys, I would say. Yeah. As you watched Jeremiah out there and you kind of relate it back to what you were just saying there, he comes out, second play of the game, they try and set up that screen pass for him, and he drops it. What do you think was going through his mind? Obviously a pretty proven player, but what do you think, first time in front of 102,000 people, what do you think he's thinking in that moment?
Well, and I think he had a offsides. He lined up in the neutral zone the next play, so he had like 2 back-to-back drive killer plays. But the thing I loved about his response was I didn't see any bad body language, or I didn't see him like clap his hands or touch his helmet. Like it was just like it didn't happen. It didn't faze him. And when I saw that reaction, I was like, I know Day, I know Chip Kelly, they're going to get the ball back in his hands and he's going to respond. Because, I mean, I've seen him live at practice. I mean, you hear how great of a player he is already. And it's just if that's his floor, I'll take it. You know what I mean? Like if that's a game where, he let the freshman jitters get to him first game, it wasn't that bad, right? It was something that he could bounce back from, and he bounced back in a huge way. I think the thing about him that sticks out to me is his playing strength. Like he's not wiry. He's very solid. He has a great body. He runs fast. He's always in the right place, and he catches the ball with his hands, with great confidence. So his playing strength is that of a senior for sure.
Which of his plays stood out the most to you? I think obviously the deep catch is the one that most people remember, but 2 touchdowns. Had a few other catches for first downs. What stood out in terms of the plays there?
I think I like the goal line slant the best. Just for a freshman to be able to press up on a guy, close that space, hand fight, and then like fight through the ball. And like this sounds weird, but like he finished the play on his feet.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of can get overlooked. I had a coach with me when I was in Houston, Gary Kubiak. He always used to say, real pros stay on their feet, right? Like nobody gets hurt in practice if everybody stays on their feet. And the fact that he finished that play on his feet, kind of wiggled the guy off of him, I was like, whoa, like that's a grown man. Like that's the ability to be able to fight through contact, keep a strong core, have a hands catch, and finish for 6. Like that's big boy stuff. That's pro stuff.
I thought it was interesting. Will Howard said, if he's one-on-one, I'm going to JJ.
Yeah.
For a freshman who's, they've only been together for a handful of months here, to build that chemistry, to build that trust that quickly, what does that say? You mentioned he's been doing things in practice. We saw some of that when we were out there, but what does that say about a young kid, especially a fifth-year quarterback who's getting here the first time? You think he might, look for a Mecca, a guy who's been around a while, but to trust the freshman like that, what does that say about him?
I mean, it shows everything, right, in his work ethic and practice, and just being able to form that trust with Will, right? I mean, there was reports where Chip and Ryan had meetings with Will Howard before the game, like, hey, like at Kansas State, that guy's covered, but not here, right? Like throw him open, like or put it to where only he can get it and he can make an athletic play. So just the fact that they're getting that chemistry early in big games, that's when it's going to really come, because coverage will get tighter. And I mean, he can't surprise anybody, right? Like Marvin Harrison had like an element of surprise. Like we didn't know how good he was going to be. And I mean, in the Rose Bowl, I'm pretty sure he caught you off guard, like it caught me and a lot of Buckeye fans and alumni with his performance. And then that next year, we were like, hey, he should have a big year, but holy snap, like, like this guy is like one of the best receivers ever come to Ohio State. JSN had an element of surprise. He had Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Jeremiah Smith is circled. Like, we got to stop this guy. So that's good that they have that rapport and trust that he can, fight through contact and make those one-on-one plays.
I asked Coach Day this week, when you have a debut like that, what's next? Obviously, teams are going to circle you maybe twice now. There's going to be more coverage your way. Obviously, the Buckeyes have other receivers, so they can't just put double coverage on everybody. But for a guy like that now, what does he have to do to make sure that he continues, maybe not 92 yards and 2 touchdowns every game, but continues to be a dominant player?
Yeah, I mean, just constant improvement. And I mean, by all means, his character is what's going to like overcome those things, right? Like he's a guy that's always working. He's had a blueprint with the Mecca. Hartline's going to always push him. Chip is always going to be creative about being able to get him the ball in great places. So, I don't really think there's an opportunity where you might stop him just because the talent level is so high. It's just really one of those things to where, hey, like, what's his preparation like, week 6 or 7? You're a little dinged up. This is your first time, going on the road and coming back, and you got to balance class and, and weightlifting. So just normal freshman hurdles, really. But as far as the football and the character of number 4, I'm not really worried about those things. Everything, all the great things that you hear, those habits will overcome adversity.
Does it amaze you as a former Ohio State wide receiver to look at this room and just see how it's been up almost every year going back a while now? There's that next guy that seems to up the ante. Is that something that, given kind of where the position was when you were there, which was still very good, and you mentioned some of the guys that were there when you got into that room, but to see the level that it's at now and it continues to rise, does that surprise you ever?
I mean, I in my heart of hearts, I believe Ohio State is wide receiver U, going all the way back to Paul Warfield, Chris Carter, Joey Galloway, those guys in the 90s, the Terry Glenns of the world, the D Millers, the David Bostons, and then going into the early 2000s, the Anthony Gonzalez's, the Ted Gins, the Hartline Rubisky's, myself, Devin Smith, Mike Thomas, all the way to the Paris Campbell, KJ Hill, McLaurin, um, the G. Wilson, JSN, Chris Olave, to Marvin Harrison, to Jeremiah Smith, to Mecca Ibuka, and Brandon Ennis and Carnell Tate on to the future. I think there's a standard here. And I think what has helped the wide receivers get better is the game of football, has hit a turn to where it's, the evolution of the game and the evolution of passing and offenses and the spread offense and tempo and being more creative with personnel groupings has allowed the wide receivers here to excel numbers wise at a high rate. But I mean, and it's nothing against these guys, but you put a Joey Galloway, you put a Ted Ginn, you put a David Boston, put a Chris Carter in a system like, Ryan Day and Urban, like it's no telling what you would get, right? I mean, like the standard here has been very high. And I think that's why those guys came here, because of those names, I mentioned. And I don't know if I had to make sure I mentioned Dane, because Dane was an absolute killer. And that's my boy. But yeah, man, it's just, you think about it and you're allowing the recruiting to take care of itself. You're allowing the development here to take care of itself in terms of, I mean, you walk through the Woody, it's literally, Pat, it's on the walls. Like, oh, these are all the guys. Like, oh yeah, like you're next, bro. So it's one of those things, man. No, I'm not surprised. I mean, I feel connected to those guys. They feel like little brothers, even though, I kind of know them in passing, but I'm rooting for them. I love to see them succeed. And it's just, that wide receiver fraternity here is really special.
I mentioned Emeka, Carnell Tate. You mentioned Brandon Inniss as well. Obviously, the attention was on Jeremiah with that first performance. Carnell does get in the end zone. Emeka probably should have had a touchdown. I'm still not sure what was.
Yeah, he got robbed. That was a touchdown. Yeah, that was a touchdown.
Yeah. What do you see from these other wide receivers this season as we go forward? And obviously, there's going to be games where they're going to need the other guys to step up. And Brandon Inniss, punt returner. I know you did a little bit of that as well. Yeah. What do you make of that group as a whole?
I think the group is an excellent group, and I think they're like out to prove how good they are. I mean, just starting with Emeka, obviously he is like a warm blanket, like he will provide Will a lot of, cover and warmth as the season goes on and it gets cold. And Jeremiah, Smith has going to be in a place in an uncharted, waters where he hasn't been before, where he's being game planned for. And then you allow a guy like Emeka in the slot to just get one-on-one. It's a mismatch every time. So he'll get off. I really saw a lot of improvement in Carnell Tate. I mean, he's very special. He has long speed. He can run every single route. He can do everything. And I see some growth there as him as a player. He's maturing. I think he's going to have a huge year. And the thing I love about Brandon Inniss is I think the thirst level is there, right? Like the thirst level to want to return a punt. Like Coach Day spoke about, just doing this research on when the ball hits the ground on turf fields, you lose, 10 to 15 yards. And I thought he went and fielded every punt with aggressiveness. I thought that he got downhill fast. He is a one-cut wide receiver that can get back up to his full speed. So I really believe at some point I'm just going to be sitting on the couch, watching a routine punt in a big game, and he's going to take it to the house, and it's going to mean a lot. And this team is going to be able to win on special teams and use that third phase in the game, which I think is kind of like, held this group back a little bit, right? Yeah. Like, not in a bad way. It's just football is played on all three phases. And I thought Urban did a great job of always having something special for punt return, a fake kick here, field goal, a special return. And when you are playing against an even matched team and you can beat somebody on special teams and like gain more yardage and reduce their yardage, that's an added advantage, right? And I think that's a focus for this 2024 team. And I think Brandon Inniss is right at the center of that. And I'm really excited for him this year because he's going to touch paint on one of those returns, Pat, for sure.
Yep, I believe so as well. I love what I've seen from him. Before I let you go here, just the offense as a whole obviously got off to a little bit of a slow start with a couple of those drives. But what did you see? I know that the run game, the run blocking has been talked about a lot. I think there were more positives than people probably realize if you really dive into it. But what did you see from this group, and what are your expectations going forward?
I think overall, like I saw clean operations. I mean, like when you think about the idea of walkthrough, it's I'm calling a play. We're gonna walk through it, but what's important is alignment, assignment, and execution. Even though you're walking, and I felt like alignment, assignment, execution was at a very high level. Now, I'm pretty sure when you turn on the film. I mean, I didn't watch the film from the wide view, but
Yeah.
pretty sure there's things they can clean up. But operationally wise, I thought it was clean. I thought Chip had a nice, roll, some nice sets called. I thought he mixed things in very well. And at the same time, just the idea of just self-scouting, like why do I need to go 4 wide? Like, why do I need to have 2 backs? Like, why do I need to give, Akron my most sexiest looks where we can beat them on install 1 through 4, right? Day 1 through 1, 2, 3, 4. And all we got to do is execute it. And I thought that they accomplished that. And as you're building up for Oregon, you want to have a couple things in your back pocket that they haven't seen yet. So it means we got to execute our base stuff. And I thought that they formed an identity. I thought Will Howard formed an identity within the offense and within the offensive line and the wide receivers that, hey, like, this isn't a play where I run my route and, it's a sack. No, Will's going to create extra time. He's going to move the pocket, and in that same breath, a difference from this year and last year, and even with CJ, it's I need to get my hand on a guy downfield because Will he's rolling, right? Like, he's getting to that second level as a quarterback running the ball. So I think this group has a lot of room to just play at a really high level. It's not like room for improvement. It's just they can show us so much more that we haven't got to see. So because it's so much talent. So I was very happy. I'll be honest. I fell asleep at the end of the third quarter because I was like, yeah, I saw what I needed to see.
And you did, yeah.
Ate Saturday night.
Nice. One last thing. Yep. When you with the way college football is, you don't get a preseason, right? It's not the NFL. It's not like other sports. So how much does that first game, we talked about it, you sort of mentioned it there, just kind of getting out some of the wrinkles, some of the things you've gone live in practice, but you're playing your teammates. How much is that a factor in a lot of these games? Because it wasn't just Ohio State that had some struggles. Michigan struggled a little bit. Oregon struggled a little bit. How much do you put on kind of first games and working things out?
Yeah, you're really not in like full season mode until like game 4 or 5, right? Where like you're used to the process of the hotel, you're used to the walk, you're used to travel, getting on the plane, kind of getting your pregame routine in. Like, everything is kind of, you're trying to find what you did last year for returning guys, and for new guys, you're trying to like create your pregame routine, right? And by like week 4 or 5, that stuff is set in. You've had an away game, you've had several home games, and that's when those big plays really start coming, and you really feel like you're hitting everything on all cylinders for sure throughout the season.
All right, DeVier, I know you got kids in the house, as you mentioned before we got on, so yeah. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy, but let's do this again sometime this season. Let's talk more. I enjoy having you on talking.
Man, anytime, Pat. I got you. What are you drinking on again?
It's Kitty Paw. It's a seltzer. It's a peach seltzer. It's all right.
Okay.
Usually I have a beer, but like I said, I gotta go help a buddy move, so I didn't want to get got to drive out to Dublin. And
you're changing, Pat. Like, you're only a beer guy. We gotta get you an umbrella for that Kitty Paw.
Fair enough. I deserve that. Man, next time it'll be better. I promise.
Oh man, thanks for having me anytime. I got you, bro.
All right, thanks, DeVier. Good talking with you. All right, thanks again to DeVier Posey, former Buckeye wide receiver, who more than generous with his time. Got family, got all sorts of stuff going on. So I appreciate him hopping on with us on the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I wanted to cover Jeremiah Smith with him because obviously, being a former receiver, he knows a thing or two about that. But there are plenty of other things I wanted to talk about from that first game that, in terms of where things can continue to be improved. I think obviously the thing that everyone's talked about this week is the offensive line and the run game, and the fact that Ohio State ended up with, what was it, 170 yards on 33 carries. That's 5.2 yards a carry. Not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but considering you're playing an Akron team that you expect to have, you don't expect, I guess, to be one of the better teams in the country by any stretch. I think you're looking at the stats, yards per carry, Buckeyes are 51st after that first game. So probably not exactly where you want things. But I think the thing that stood out to me when I went back, watched the game a second time, kind of watched the offensive line, rewound things. Like the first quarter was not great. There's no doubt about that. In terms of the run blocking, weren't getting the second level. Still struggled with that some in the second quarter as well. But I thought it was better and better into the third. You saw some better runs from Travion Henderson. I think his best run, let me look at it here. His best run, 21 yards. Yeah, 21 yards in the third quarter. And that's when they started to get some things. Quinshon, I know some people have pointed to that touchdown and not getting enough push there on the 2-yard run. I can certainly understand that. I think they should have dominated more up front. I think we need to recognize the change in the offensive line. I pointed this out on one of our shows earlier this week. Not only did you have two first-time starters, Integra Shabola and Austin Saraveld, but Austin Saraveld was playing his first college snaps at all. He didn't play at all as a true freshman last year. Then you put Seth McLaughlin in there, who's an experienced guy, but his first time playing at the shoe, playing with this group of guys. So you do the math there. None of those guys had played in a game against the guy next to him. And that may sound like something you should just work through by practicing camp. No, there's more to it than that. There are guys that you have to build that chemistry. And so playing next to guys that you're not used to in a real game is going to take a little bit of time. And you don't have Donovan Jackson in there, who is a very important piece of this. So I don't want to let the Buckeyes off the hook. This has to get better. But I do think it improved a little bit as the game went on. I also think we're not talking enough about some of the other blocking, the tight end blocking, which was, I think, good, not great. The wide receivers on the perimeter, that all goes into this run game, right? And there were at least a couple plays where I think you could point the blame not at the offensive line, but at the wide receivers when the Buckeyes tried to get outside where the blocking wasn't there. And that's been a standard at Ohio State and something that I think will continue to be a standard. But as we were just talking about with DeVier, it's a first game. Like, you've blocked in practice, but this is different. Those are your teammates. Yeah, you're still trying to prove something in practice. But I think that, it was a combination of things and not just the offensive line when we're looking at the run game numbers. I do expect it to be better this week. I'll touch on that in a few minutes. But I think that, look, everyone wanted this team to go out and look great, right? All the offseason talk, you want to see them throw the ball around, dominate up front, run the ball, get the starters out at halftime, all that. Things don't always go as planned. Will Howard starts the game 0 for 4. I'll get back to that in a second. It just wasn't clicking right away. And once it started clicking, things were pretty good. So the key, I think, this week will be getting it started quicker and getting that better push up front. We'll see if Donovan Jackson plays or not, which I still think will have an impact. But at least that line, if it's the same 5, they will have played one game together. Now, Will Howard starts the game 0 for 4. But if you go back and look at those 4 passes, all of them were accurate. One was dropped by Jeremiah Smith. Another was broken up. I mean, I don't remember exactly on all 4, but all 4 were where they needed to be for a receiver to catch the ball, and it wasn't caught for one reason or another. If Will Howard starts that game 4 for 4, especially as Ryan Day pointed out, the screen pass to Jeremiah Smith, I mean, it was set up to score. Everything was blocked. I mean, maybe he doesn't quite get in the end zone. Who knows what happens downfield, but you get the ball in his hands. I think you've seen what can happen. So if that hits, now we're talking about a completely different start to that game. If they score on, I think it was the second play of the game, and now you're kind of off running instead of, you go 3 and out and you have a penalty and all that. Well, the momentum starts to build quicker, I think, for the Buckeyes. But I really liked what Will Howard gave this team. I think he was more accurate than I expected. If you read our roundtable, that's one of the things we talked about that just went out today over on Bucknuts. Some of the other guys agreed that it was just an impressive debut. The one thing I will say, and Will admitted this week, there is more opportunity for him to use his legs. There was the play, I want to say it was in the second quarter. He bought time, kind of stepped up, was moving towards the line of scrimmage, and ended up throwing it out of bounds, out through the end zone, over Jeremiah Smith's head. And at first, when I saw it in person, I thought he had a lot of room to run. Going back and watching it, he didn't have as much room as I thought, but you probably pick up 6, 7, 8 yards. Maybe he breaks a tackle. I think he's faster than defenses expect. So, maybe he just beats a guy with his speed. And, all of a sudden, instead of being at, 2nd and 10, 3rd and 10, whatever it was at that point, now you're at 2nd and 8 or 2nd and 2 or 3rd and 2 if he picks up 8 yards or so. Like, not every run play that he does needs to be for 15, 20 yards because there's just green grass. Like, go get a few yards here and there. Now, he doesn't need to be Lamar Jackson in the first NFL game running all the time and, taking hits. We don't want to see that. But you certainly, I think, can expect more from Will. And I think now that he's seen it on film in a game, in a Buckeye uniform, as opposed to just watching it practice tape, he'll recognize, okay, there is space to run if you're going to take it. Now, if the throw is there, make the throw. I mean, that's what he's there to do first. But I thought that was the only thing about Will Howard's game that I'd like to see improve, is that recognition of taking off running, because he wasn't a big scrambler at Kansas State. I think he had something like 35 scrambling yards last season. His rushing came mostly on called run plays, and we saw one of those. And he ended up picking up a first down running behind Quinshon Judkins. I think it might have been the first or second first down of the game for the Buckeyes. So, those will be in there too. And I think there's probably a significant number of those plays that the Buckeyes aren't going to show unless they need to here in the first few games. But that scrambling, when he sees the space and there's not an obvious throw to make, just take what you can get and get down. Don't get hit, get out of bounds, whatever it may be. I think that will be an area for Will to improve in going into week 2, week 3, etc. Defense, look, you hold Akron to 6 points. You hold them to 177 total yards. Job well done for the most part. The one thing I will say is I think tackling was a bit of an issue, and not something I noticed a ton watching the game live, but watching it back on the TV copy, there were definitely some missed tackles out there that I think Ohio State will certainly want to clean up. And according to Pro Football Focus, there were 12 missed tackles. That's too many. Yes, it's a season opener. Yes, you don't tackle a ton in camp, so there are some missed tackles to be expected, but I think that's too many. If you want to look at where they came from, Caleb Downs, surprisingly, had 3 missed tackles. I thought Caleb Downs played a pretty underrated game. I know he didn't get talked about a lot because he didn't have much outside of I think it was a half sack and a tackle. I didn't remember him missing 3 tackles. So when I saw that, I was a bit surprised. But watching the tape back, I was like, okay, there were a few in there. But just in terms of where he was moving around, you can see what the Buckeyes are going to be able to do with him this season. But Caleb Downs had 3. Kenyatta Jackson was credited with 2 missed tackles. And then Arvell Reese, Hero Canoe, Davison Igbinosun, CJ Hicks, JT Tuamlau, Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock each had 1. Got to cut those down. And I think that would be the emphasis for me this week for the defensive side of the ball. Yeah, they played a great game. 3 turnovers, 2 touchdowns, all that. Fantastic. That's what you want to see. Now clean up that stuff that does happen in a week 1 game. If you can get that cleaned up, if you are missing, significantly fewer tackles each game, I already think this defense has the potential to be the best in the country, but I don't want to see 12 missed tackles. I just don't think that is a recipe for success for this group, especially once you start playing better teams, because, I think Akron's front 7, maybe you give them some credit for slowing down Ohio State's run game. It's a solid front seven for the MAC. This offense didn't do a ton. So you should be able to get these guys to the ground. I'd like to see that cleaned up against Western Michigan. And then the last thing, and I'm going to bring this up probably every week until it happens, so I'm hoping it happens sooner rather than later. I want that return touchdown. Probably a punt return, just based on what we saw in the game. Brandon Innes had 4 punt returns for 60 yards. I thought he was really impressive in doing that, and we talked to him this week. I wrote a story about it. You can read on Bucknuts, just kind of how he's embraced that role and really fits this new mantra that Ohio State has of a renewed focus and aggressiveness on special teams. He wants to go get the ball. He wants to be the punt returner, and he wants to go get the ball. He wants to make a play. He knows his time will come on offense, where be it at some point during this season or next year when Emeka Egbuka's gone. And he did get into the game. I believe he had. He did not record a catch, but he was definitely out there on offense. So I really liked that. I want to see him continue to build on that. I want to see him take one to the end zone. Jaden Ballard had 1 kick return for 23 yards. Definitely the potential there for him to break one. I thought his punt returning in the past, the decision-making on fielding it, not fielding it, fair catching it, those type of things hasn't been great. But on kick return, I think there's a little bit less decision-making you have to do there, just in terms of when to return it, when not to. Certainly has the ability to take one to the house, and the Buckeyes have made it a priority to get that done this season. So not a ton to clean up. I'm sure if you ask Ryan Day or the coaches, they could point to a bazillion other things. They're going to nitpick every little detail because this team has very high expectations, but just some of the things that stood out to me that I want to see improvements on going into this week. Cheers. That's not bad. It's not a beer, but it's not bad. In terms of this week, Western Michigan, if you didn't watch their game, they played Friday night against Wisconsin. A really interesting game in terms of how they handled Wisconsin. I think some of this may have had some. So the score was 28-14, Wisconsin by the end. Western Michigan scored their final touchdown with 14:15 to play in the fourth quarter to go up 14-13. And then Wisconsin scores 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to win the game. I think somewhat Wisconsin was caught off a little bit. Western Michigan, it's a second year under head coach, new defensive coordinator who came from Louisiana Tech. So I think there may have been some confusion, it looked like, early on what exactly Western Michigan was going to do defensively. The box score, it ends up being fine. Wisconsin rushes for 196 yards and 3 touchdowns. So, pretty typical Wisconsin day. But I think on another day against a MAC team, they put up more yards there. But what did stand out to me about this Western Michigan team is they are not going to just go lightly into this game and say, well, we'll just, take another loss on the chin, primetime game against a Big Ten team, and wait till we get to conference play to start winning games. No, if you watched, they showed during the broadcast a clip from inside the Western Michigan locker room before the game. Their head coach, Lance Taylor, I believe. Let me double check that. I don't want to say the wrong name. Yeah, Lance Taylor. Fiery guy. I mean, he was just, yelling in the locker room, getting them fired up, veins popping out of his neck. That's a guy that players are going to want to compete for, regardless of who the opponent is. And I think that's what you saw against Wisconsin, is a team that's going to fight, and they're not going to make it easy on Wisconsin. And I think that they will make things difficult at some level against Ohio State. They have an experienced quarterback in Hayden Wolf. Now, he was only 12 of 18 for 141 yards, did throw an interception. He's a guy I think Ohio State secondary should be able to handle. No receiver on their team had more than 2 catches in that opening game. So I'm not too worried about the pass game. It'll be interesting to see Ohio State handling the rush. Jalen Buckley had 16 carries for 64 yards and 2 touchdowns. He runs hard. And they have a couple other guys that will carry the ball as well. But Buckley is a guy, I believe he is number 6 for the Broncos. Somebody to keep an eye on because he may be able to cause Ohio State a little bit of issues. I'm not worried about Ohio State's defense. I think they will be fine. Looking at Ohio State's offense against Western Michigan's defense, the attacking the middle of the field seemed to be where Wisconsin had most of its success. Now, some of that could be that Tyler Van Dyke, making his first start for Wisconsin, did not do a ton of outside stuff, didn't take shots downfield very often. But in terms of, getting the matchups you want over the middle, Wisconsin was able to do that a good amount. And I think that's something Ohio State will obviously notice. Not to say that Will Howard's not going to make those throws to the outside. He's not going to stop looking for guys like Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith out there. But, if you can get the matchups you want over the middle, maybe the tight ends become a bigger part of this game. And Ryan Day did talk about that this week, getting the tight ends more involved offensively. We'll see. Jelani Thurman was out there quite a bit. I'd like to see him get involved. I don't believe a tight end had a catch in the first game. No, they did not. So I think the only tight end target went to Will Howard, and it was over his head. Will Howard threw it to Will Kazmarek. It was over his head. So, that may be a recipe for some success. Look, I don't want to make it sound like I think Western Michigan is going to be in this game. I think Ohio State has made it a focus to start faster in this one and things like that. But I do just think that the Broncos can make things a little messy. And you saw that against Wisconsin. I don't think it will be nearly as close against Ohio State. If you want to see our predictions, they're on Bucknuts. I did not predict a close game. And I did not predict Ohio State to give up a touchdown. I'm going to see how long I can confidently do that because I do think this defense could keep teams out of the end zone. But yeah, I just think it could be a little. There could be some tricky things that happen during this game, I guess is what I will say. But we'll see. We will see. The final thing that I want to vent about this game, and I saw a couple comments, a couple questions in here. I will get to them before I wrap up. Cheers, by the way. Happy Friday. Night games against non-conference MAC opponents. I understand why this is happening. I think it has something to do with Big Ten contracts and Big Ten Network and all that. And, putting the Buckeyes in prime time on the Big Ten Network means people will watch it. Big Ten Network doesn't often get big time Ohio State games. In fact, they never get big time Ohio State games. But the decision to play this game at 7:30 has been driving me up a wall since it came out. This is just not a game. Look, I know players like night games, fans like night games. I don't think players or fans prefer to play Western Michigan at night. I think you all would prefer to see this game at noon and save some of the later games in the season for night games. But it's had me frustrated all week. Like, this should be a noon game. We should get done, work till 3 or 4. You guys do whatever you do, and then a home in time for the night game. I don't like it. I understand it, like I said, but it frustrates me. I think the night game should be saved for the big time opponents. And again, I get how TV works and that drives everything and all that, but it's similar to most people's frustration about playing these big time games at noon on Fox. But, I'm going to be, woe is me, right? First world problems here, but we're going to be working till 1, 2 in the morning at the press box for a game against Western Michigan. I'm happy to do it most of the time. I'm happy to do it even if it were a Big Ten game against a team that Ohio State should beat handily. Western Michigan, though, again, first world problems. Life could be much worse, but I just don't like when they do this with these not meaningless, but less exciting non-conference games. It's just disappointing for me. All right, let me get to a few of these comments that I saw on here. Scott Shirley says turnovers was outstanding and 68 yards on special teams since 2023's total. I think it was 75. He said 65 here. Yeah. The turnovers are great. We heard all offseason that this is what the Buckeyes defense was going to do. We saw it in practice some, to see it in games. Very reassuring, I think, if you're a Buckeye fan, because that was the one thing, though, it was one of two things, that and sacks. And they started to do that as well. The Buckeye defense last year missed. Todd McElmurray, I think. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Josh Fryer grading below 60 against a MAC school is simply unacceptable. Yes, I think. I assume you're referring to PFF grades. Take that with a grain of salt. I don't think Josh Fryer had a great game, but I've never been, especially when it comes to offensive line play, I'm not a huge fan of the PFF grades. If I'm often referencing PFF, it's for things like I talked about earlier, missed tackles, stuff like that. The grades I think you can use as sort of a barometer, but I don't know if it's the best way to do it. I mean, especially given how they do. Like, if you look at PFF's best defensive grades, it was Gabe Powers and Caden Curry. Gabe Powers played. I'm trying to find his snap count here. He didn't play a lot, is my point. And so, like, saying he was the best player for Ohio State's defense, yeah, I mean, when he came in, he did well. Obviously, had the pick six, but yeah, I'm not a huge PFF grade guy, and especially when it comes to offensive line. But your point still stands. Josh Fryer, not good enough, especially after we heard all offseason how he'd reshaped his body and was performing well. Dave Gillen asked, Texas shirt. Well, I guess I am wearing a Texas shirt. I wonder, that not intentional, wink, wink. Yes, I'm aware of what's happening this weekend and up north and the Texas game. I am conscious of this shirt choice. Let's see if we have anything here. Will Starr said, I hope we are in total control by halftime so we can see more of Brown and some reps for Julian Sayin and the rest of the QBs. Yeah, that would be great. I think that's what most people expected last game was, okay, Will Howard can get out early in the third quarter. You can see a decent amount of Devin Brown, maybe get Julian Sayin his debut. I think it was smart by Ohio State to not throw Julian Sayin in there. Obviously, I believe Devin Brown is the backup quarterback for now, but I don't think you needed to throw Julian Sayin in there just to do it. But it would be nice to see Julian Sayin at some point before they get into more competitive games. All right. Well, I think that's going to Will Starr asked, what did the coaches grade Fryer? I don't know. They do not share that information with us in terms of grades. They will sometimes talk about who grade out as champion on a specific level. Fryer's name did not come up during that. So unsure. It was not a good game by Josh Fryer. I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying I disagree with PFF's grades. I'm just saying that's not the end all be all, I think, when you're looking at how guys played. But yeah, he did not have a great game. And, I think it's fair to still be questioning that position there, and we'll see how it goes going forward. Will Starr also said, I keep saying Texas stomps Michigan and Ewers hits them with the OH after his third touchdown pass. I do think Texas wins the game. I think Michigan's defense will probably keep them in a lot of games this year. I just rewatched that game yesterday, and Michigan's offense, not pretty. Even Donovan Edwards, I don't know what his final numbers were, but it was not good from him. And I think that's kind of the guy that they were expecting to do something. I think when they put Alex Orji in there, he can make some plays with his legs, but then you're pretty one-dimensional. He did have a touchdown pass. But yeah, I think Michigan probably hangs around just because of the defense, at least to some degree, but I do expect Texas to win. In terms of viewers throwing up the OH, that would be funny. We did have a story. It was on the 24/7 Sports Network, and we put it out on the Bucknuts Twitter account if you want to read it, about Quinn Ewers' kind of journey and now how he finally gets to face that Michigan team that would have been his rival had he stayed. I really like Quinn Ewers as a player. I think, he's gotten better. I think I watched the Texas game this morning. He was he was pretty good, not great for a first game, but still really good. And you know what you're going to get from Quinn. But in terms of him throwing up the OH, just, you left Ohio State, right? You had the opportunity to be that guy. I don't know. It would be funny. It would be really funny. I hope if it does happen, I hope it gets caught on camera so that it's all over the internet. And then Dave Gillen will end on that. He said, hook 'em horns. Yeah, I think most Buckeye Nation is in agreement there. I did a podcast before the season with some of our UCLA guys, and they asked about the kind of how Big Ten teams fan bases treat other Big Ten fan bases. And I said, for the most part, I think Big Ten fans want to see other Big Ten teams do well, especially in non-conference bowl games, things like that. I was like, the exception, it probably is the rivalry games, especially Ohio State and Michigan. So I think more often than not, if this were any other team in the Big Ten playing an SEC team, you would see the fans wanting to, the Big Ten to represent well. Does not seem to be that way in Columbus, Ohio, or across Buckeye Nation, does it? And Hayden Custom Woodworks said, yours was quoted saying he wanted to be remembered, not just a guy that comes and goes. Kind of ironic, don't you think? Yeah, well, he'll be remembered in Austin. I think that's for sure. All right, we're going to wrap it up. I want to say thank you again to DeVier Posey for jumping on. If you missed his time on the show, he was talking about Jeremiah Smith, talking about this Ohio State wide receiver core, talking about Ohio State's offense. You can be able to go back and watch this on anywhere you normally do, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. It should be on there. And then, of course, there will be the podcast version as well here shortly. So thanks a lot to DeVier. He's got kids running around his house, but he took the time to jump on with us, and I really appreciate it. He had some good insight on what it's like to be a, ballyhooed wide receiver coming in, playing your first game at Ohio State. Obviously, slightly different experiences between him and Jeremiah, but the closest comparison in my Rolodex. Thank you all for tuning in. We will be back next week. It is an off week, so see what we can cook up for that week in terms of what we do on the happy hour. But we'll be back, and we'll talk then. Final thing, headline Sunday morning. Buckeyes get it rolling, handle Western Michigan. Like I said, I think while Western Michigan might be able to do some tricky things to frustrate Ohio State a little bit, I don't think this game is remotely close. And I do think the Buckeyes get off to a faster start, which I think will allow people to leave the game feeling more confident. But we'll be on the post-game show. Both Steve Hellwagon and I will be on with Dave Biddle late Saturday night. But we'll talk to you guys then. Cheers.